credo sinceramente di essere stato e di essere di gran lunga il miglior Presidente del Consiglio che l'Italia abbia potuto avere nei 150 anni della sua storia.
In this program, we'll try and present an in-depth view of one of the world's most controversial individuals, a businessman, politician, bon vivant, who over the years has gathered a fortune estimated at $9 billion, and whose political power and influence is unparalleled in Italy and in the rest of Europe. Who is Silvio Berlusconi?
He thinks to be the chosen one.
È dictator.
Vuoto.
So let's take a closer look at this man and try and understand why, while some consider him to be a skillful innovator, the best Italy has to offer, others fear he might represent a grave threat to Italian democracy.
Very few, if any, Italian prime ministers have become as famous as Silvio Berlusconi, or perhaps some would say as infamous. In a country where governments rose and fell at an average rate of one a year, between the end of the Second World War and the mid-1990s, his survival rate is a record. But why do Italians vote for him, and what impact has he had on the world stage? Much of Silvio Berlusconi's appeal to Italians is his image of a successful self-made man who has accumulated enormous wealth through his own efforts. His skills in the economic field are perceived by part of the electorate as a legitimization of his political power. Born 73 years ago in Milan, Berlusconi's professional career, which included working as a cruise ship singer, vacuum cleaner salesman, and pop singer-songwriter before moving on to the field of construction and financial investments, transformed him from a man of ordinary beginnings into a media magnate and multi-billionaire, building up his fortune through real estate developments, television networks, and publishing houses. His entry into politics was presented to the nation as a selfless desire to dedicate his financial wizardry and know-how to solving the country's problems by, as he phrased it, getting onto the field.
The football imagery was reflected in the name of the party he founded in 1994, called Forza Italia, or Come On Italy, perfect for a nation of football fans such as Italy is.
Berlusconi was very effective in 2001 he had a 5-point plan. He called it a contract with Italy. Very flashy, but very effective. Simple, straightforward, doable points.
He sent a message that the change was possible. He sent the message we need innovation. He sent the message we will promote the merits. He sent the message I am the example. I, Mr. Berlusconi, am the example. How possible is to let who was born around to die square.
But some believe Berlusconi's political career was marred from the start.
Well, what happened, it was a fact totally new and totally illegal. Totally new because a very rich man entered the field of politics, giving immediately the impression of being able to dominate it, not because of new idea or fantastic vision, but just because he was rich, immensely rich and able to buy things and to buy people. The illegal fact that should have prevented the election, that is the eligibility of Mr. Berlusconi, was the conflict of interest. He was the owner of everything private there is in television. There was. At this time there is also Murdoch. But at this time he was the owner of everything private in the field of television, and plus 2 newspapers in in Italy. Since by our local laws, it is up to the Prime Minister to regulate the government of the public television, that is to appoint or influence the appointment of people in the state-controlled television. With Berlusconi, we had a person that was dominating private television and public television.
Forza Italia has since evolved into the current People of Freedom Party, which also includes the post-fascist turned liberal party National Alliance, led by current President of Italy's Chamber of Deputies, Gianfranco Fini. Tensions between Mr. Fini and the Prime Minister, once the closest of allies, would eventually prove to be too strong, but more on that later. From earning the position of Prime Minister just 3 months after having stepped into the political arena, to leading Italy's strongest party, it is fair to say Berlusconi's accomplishments in the field of politics are outstanding.
But despite the grand picture of him portrayed by his television channels, and despite the support he undoubtedly can count on among many sections of Italian society, there is a large part of Italy that wants him out of office as soon as possible.
This is the so-called No Berlusconi Day. This internet-spawned citizens' campaign has seen 2 editions over the past 2 years, and in both occasions, hundreds of thousands of Italians took to the streets, voicing their condemnation of their PM.
I am disgusted by Berlusconi's policy because his point of view is against our rights that our grandfathers fought for.
What has led so many Italians to despise their leader, and so many commentators to describe him as a threat to democracy? Franco Fracassi is an Italian filmmaker who first discovered that freedom of speech and expression aren't a given in Italy when he embarked on a film project entitled Le Dame e il Cavaliere, or The Dames and the Knight in question being Silvio Berlusconi. Fracassi's documentary focuses on the relationship between the Italian Prime Minister and women.
Berlusconi has a very bad consideration of women. Women has to stay at home or to stay in the bed of men.
Some might argue that a Prime Minister's private life is exactly that, private, and what goes on in it has little bearing on his role as a politician. But there is proof Berlusconi has used his institutional role and influence to aid some of the women he has allegedly had extramarital relationships with, whether by making them candidates within his People of Freedom Party or by lending a helping hand in other ways. When phone recordings featuring conversations between the PM and an escort from the southern Italian city of Bari, Miss Patrizia Daddario, were made available on the website of the Italian news monthly L'Espresso, commentators were scandalized by their implications. Mr. Daddario also recorded audio from nights spent with the Premier in Palazzo Grazioli, Berlusconi's official residence in Rome. The tapes prove that the relationship between the two was a close one. In this clip, Berlusconi and Ms. Daddario are exchanging a few quick words before Berlusconi's departure for an official visit to Moscow on the 5th of November, after having spent the previous night together. Incidentally, Berlusconi had been invited to the US Embassy that night to follow the outcome of the US presidential elections. It appears that he was more interested in Mr. Daddario's company than in Mr. Obama's political destiny.
Pronto? Come stai? Bene.
Tutto bene?
Sì, tu?
Io sì, ho lavorato tanto, stamattina sono andato a inaugurare questa mostra, ho fatto un bellissimo discorso, un braccio, e non sembrava tanto.
Infatti come me, io non ho sonno, non ho dormito, è andata via solo la mia voce.
Ormai non abbiamo gridato.
Eppure non ho urlato.
Io sto partendo adesso per Mosca.
Va bene.
Quando domani, quando torno,
Ok, un bacione forte anche a te. Ciao.
Ms. Daddario later appeared among the People of Freedom Party candidates for the 2009 European elections, before being removed following widespread condemnation. It is understandable that a documentary covering such topics might be frowned upon by Berlusconi and his allies, but, as it turned out, others too considered it to be a threat, although of a different sort.
We didn't find any distributor at all, not for the cinema, not for DVDs. not newspapers.
Were they afraid to distribute your film?
Yes, they were. I mean, some of them they told us very directly. Others they found strange ways to explain us that was impossible for them to distribute us.
But not only independent underground filmmakers are having hard times.
The men control everything in sport, everything in movies, everything in TV production, everything in the news. The most representative story, the most exemplary story was the one of Enzo Biagi. Out of Italy, probably a few people know his name, but Enzo Biagi was the decan, the dean of the Italian journalism, and a very famous one with an immense prestige. Enzo Biagi never thought twice about telling about Mr. Berlusconi everything he knew and everything he thought it should be said. He was thrown away from the Italian television.
Berlusconi's hold over the media is undeniable. Of Italy's 7 free-to-view channels, he owns 3. As Prime Minister, he also has indirect control over the country's national television, RAI.
In 2004, independent ONG watchdog Freedom House downgraded Italy's status with regard to freedom of the press, shifting it from free to partly free. It is the only country in the EU to have been classified as such and has not been promoted since.
È quello di un imprenditore. Imprenditore con la stampa, per un imprenditore la stampa è pubblicità, è propaganda, è la vendita di un prodotto.
But Italy's press has often tried to fight back. At the beginning of July, journalists held a national strike, with most of the country's newspapers and news channels shutting down, against what has become known as the Gagging Bill. The bill, which was aimed at limiting the use of wiretaps issued by magistrates within the context of criminal investigations, and which imposed severe sanctions on journalists or papers publishing wiretap transcripts, was presented by Berlusconi's government as an efficient tool to protect the privacy of Italian citizens against the intrusions of overzealous magistrates. It was not perceived as such. Rather, the bill was viewed as an attempt to keep scandals involving prominent businessmen and politicians, including those of the Prime Minister, under wrap and far from public scrutiny. This was just the latest in a series of bills that are commonly labelled ad personam laws by Berlusconi's detractors, using the Latin expression meaning for the person or tailor-made to protect certain individuals. Berlusconi's history with the judiciary has always been a troubled one.
To date, Berlusconi has, he claims, attended 2,500 court hearings, been subject to 577 police inspections, and paid out more than 100 million euros in lawyers' fees. He describes his experiences with the judiciary as torture.